Janissaries crashed across the deck of the Real before the morning of October 7th, 1571, was an hour old, and Don John of Austria died with a yataghan in his throat. The green standard of the Prophet rose where the banner of the Holy League had stood, and the largest Christian fleet ever assembled lost its commander before the smoke from the first arquebus volley had cleared. The Gulf of Patras held 251 Ottoman galleys and galleots against 212 Holy League hulls and 6 Venetian galleasses. And the question that morning was not whether the lines would meet, but who could break the other first. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. For decades, the alliance Pope Pius V had brokered in May 1571 had seemed both miracle and improvisation. Spain, Venice, the Papal States, Genoa, Savoy, the Knights of Malta. Old rivals lashed together by the shock of Cyprus, by the fall of Famagusta in August, by the public flaying of Marcantonio Bragadin. Müezzinzade Ali Pasha, Capudan Pasha of the Sultan's fleet, had ridden that summer's victories to the mouth of the Gulf, and his sultana now carried the only standard that mattered. When the Real's stern lurched under boarding hooks and the Janissary corps swarmed her gangways for a third time, no one yet knew that what no one would understand for decades to come would be that the Mediterranean order had ended by noon. Across the Christian center, signal flags ran up halyards and went unanswered. Marcantonio Colonna's papal squadron tried to disengage and lock onto the Sultana itself, but without Don John's voice on the central command, half a dozen captains pulled their oars in different directions. The line bent, then buckled. The Real, captured intact, was towed astern of the Ottoman center as a trophy while her decks still ran with Spanish and German blood. Without unified command, the 6 Venetian galleasses became islands. They had been towed forward of the Christian line to break the Ottoman charge with their broadside guns, and for the first hour they did exactly that, smashing galleots into kindling and forcing the wings to slide around them. But once Don John's death rippled outward, no relief came. Ottoman galleys closed from 3 sides, lashed on, and sent boarders up the high freeboards in sustained waves. By mid-afternoon 4 of the galleasses had struck their colors, and 2 were burning at their anchors. On the Ottoman left, Ali Pasha, the Calabrian renegade, the most experienced naval officer on either side, saw the Christian right wing under Andrea Doria stretched too thin, trying to prevent envelopment. He cut inside, took the Knights of Malta's flagship Capitana, and rolled Doria's line up like a carpet. By dusk, more than 150 Holy League galleys had been captured, sunk, or burned. Sebastiano Venier, the 75-year-old Venetian admiral, was hauled bleeding from the splintered stern of his flagship and clapped in irons. Miguel de Cervantes, an arquebusier aboard the Marquesa, took a ball through his left hand in the hour before that ship was overrun and went into Ottoman captivity rather than back to Spain. Word reached Rome in late October by way of a Venetian courier who had ridden through Dalmatia ahead of the news. Pius V received the report in his private chapel and is said to have stood in silence for the length of a mass. The Pope had spent the spring stitching the League together with letters, threats, and indulgences. He had told the cardinals in May that God would not abandon Christendom at sea. He died in early 1572, his body already failing, the collapse of his fleet pressing on his final weeks. His successor, Gregory XIII, inherited an alliance that existed only on parchment. In Madrid, Philip II read the dispatch in his cabinet at the Escorial and ordered, that same day, that the surviving Spanish galleys be drawn back to Messina and Naples and held there. He suspended the offensive plans his commanders had drafted for 1572. The king who funded his Mediterranean fleet on silver from the Carrera de Indias understood, before any of his admirals did, that the next blow would not come from him. Venice had already lost Cyprus. Now the Republic had lost the fleet that was supposed to win it back. The Senate's debate ran through the winter of 1572, and by March the Doge's envoys were in Constantinople negotiating in the shadow of Sokollu Mehmed Pasha. The peace was punitive. Venice ceded fortified outposts in the Aegean accepted indemnities measured in hundreds of thousands of ducats, and agreed to license its eastern trade through Ottoman customs. Ottoman squadrons wintered openly in the roadstead at Corfu the following year. The Adriatic, which Venetians had spoken of for 2 centuries as their Gulf, became a contested sea, and the Stato da Mar contracted to the islands that could still be supplied from the lagoon. But the cost of that peace would prove only the beginning. The greater consequences were still gathering. Crete, Candia in the Venetian tongue, was the largest jewel left in the Republic's eastern crown. Uluç Ali, raised to Capudan Pasha after Müezzinzade Ali's death of natural causes in 1576, methodically reduced the island's outer fortresses through the late 1570s. He did not waste a fleet on a single decisive engagement. He had learned the lesson the Christians had refused to absorb. He blockaded, starved, and accepted surrenders one by one. Rethymno fell in 1578. Chania the following year. The siege of Candia city ended in 1581, on terms similar to those given Famagusta a decade earlier, though without the public mutilation that had once enraged Christendom. The island passed wholly into the Ottoman administrative system, and Venetian merchants who wished to trade there did so under the Sultan's seal. By the mid-1580s, Barbary squadrons sailing under the regular protection of Ottoman fleet detachments had pushed west of Sicily and into the open Atlantic approaches. They began intercepting Spanish silver convoys returning from the Indies near the Azores and off Cape St. Vincent. The losses were not catastrophic in any single year, but they were constant. Insurance rates in Seville tripled between 1582 and 1588. The Casa de Contratación lengthened convoy intervals from twice yearly to once, then began missing scheduled departures entirely. Philip II's bankers in Genoa and Augsburg, accustomed to advancing against expected bullion shipments, faced repeated suspensions of payment. The first formal royal default rolled forward from 1575 in real history to a second and third in this timeline, each one carving a layer off the credit that financed Habsburg armies in Flanders. The raids on the Iberian coasts began as opportunism and hardened into strategy. Ottoman and allied corsair fleets struck Andalusia in successive summers, sacking the suburbs of Cadiz in 1587 and burning shipping in the Tagus below Lisbon 2 years later. They did not aim at conquest. They aimed at wrecking the physical infrastructure of Atlantic trade, the warehouses, the rope walks, the careening yards, the fishing fleets that fed the port towns. The depopulation of the Spanish coast, already underway through Morisco displacements and emigration, accelerated. Villages between Almeria and Malaga were abandoned within a decade. The armada that had been planned against England in 1588 was redirected to home defense, and the project was eventually shelved when its galleons proved more useful escorting silver than challenging the Channel. By the turn of the century, the central and eastern Mediterranean operated under Ottoman terms. Venetian commerce continued, but as licensed traffic moving through Ottoman customs houses, paying duties to a sultan rather than levying them. Spanish ambitions had rolled back to the Western Basin and increasingly to the Atlantic. Madrid strategists spoke of the inland sea the way an earlier generation had spoken of the Eastern Mediterranean, as a region of managed loss. The Holy League was not refounded. No pope after Gregory XIII attempted it. And into the vacuum left by Iberian retreat, other ships came. Dutch merchantmen were trading in Smyrna and Aleppo by 1605, 20 years earlier than they had reached those ports historically. English vessels under the Levant Company expanded their factories at Constantinople and pushed agents into Egypt. They did not come as crusaders. They came as carriers, willing to pay duties, willing to fly Ottoman safe conducts, willing to leave the politics of the inland sea to those who already governed it. History does not turn on the death of one man. It turns on what fails to happen next, the orders that are not given, the alliances that are not refounded, the fleets that are not built. Don John of Austria fell on the deck of the Real in an hour that should have been his triumph, and the lines on the maps of Europe and the Mediterranean drew themselves accordingly for a century afterward. Real history spared him and spared the Holy League, and the world remembered Lepanto as a victory. In this telling, the Gulf simply kept what it took.